multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic gathering in the South.
They said, we have power, we're going to engage in political tyranny, and this legislature has had a propensity to pass laws that the courts of this state didn't even have to get to the federal court. The courts of this state overturned. So we have the moral high ground. They're the ones that should be questioned.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Dr. Barber will speak to you.
I'm afraid Dr. Barber needs to get in my office so we can set up an appointment. No. All we need to do is just be respectful towards each other.
Forward together, not one step back. Not one step back.
Our collective hope is that we'll continue to build a movement that affects the state but has implications for this nation.
We are seeing some of the worst attacks on students and young people our state has ever seen.
The North Carolina General Assembly is attacking one of the pillars of democracy in this state.
We are now facing a voter ID law which directly targets students and is more restrictive than either South Carolina or Alabama.
These provisions individually and collectively will result in less opportunity for African Americans to vote, to have their votes counted, and to elect candidates of their choice.
This extreme bill goes further than ever to make it harder for students to vote. And it has become clear that the North Carolina General Assembly is scared of students of this state.
That is why we are here today. That is why we will march.
When blacks and progressive whites came together 144 years ago to begin the long journey out of the divisions of the Civil War, the good of the whole was their vision and their dream for this state. They knew then what we must know now. It's the only way forward. It's the better way.
The battle today is not between the Democrats and the Republicans. It is between those who believe in a philosophy of greed and selfishness and those who believe in the morality of caring for those in need.
We are workers.
Continue to fight, because I'm going to fight and I won't stop.
Now is the time to take a stand for justice throughout this land.
Not expanding Medicaid means this year that 27,000 diabetics will go without medicines and the treatments they need, that 12,000 women will go without mammograms, and 27,800 without a pap smear.
The policies of Tom Tillis, Phil Berger, and Pat McCrory are harming my patients grievously.
There are constitutional rights that must be supported in this state.
Our governor and legislators are trying to steal our birthright as citizens. But together we say you cannot have our state.
An attack on voting rights is an attack on the soul of our democracy.
This state does not deserve this. We deserve better.
But there's nothing wrong with North Carolina that a good dose of people power cannot fix. No justice, no peace.
If heaven contained flesh and blood, I believe this is what heaven would look like.
Yes, we know.
We are God's beloved people, every single one of us.
Don't tell me you are pro-life when the Senate's budget kicks low-income pregnant women off of Medicaid and refuses prenatal care. Thank you so much.
Nothing concerns me more than the ways these new laws and this new budget will harm children and teachers and schools all over North Carolina.
We are here in force because what they are doing to public education is a travesty, and we refuse to sit by and do nothing as they destroy this profession that we love so dearly.
I'm a teacher. I drove 6 hours this morning. I was so depressed when I heard what this legislature thinks of me. But I came last week and I was inspired, and I'll come as often as I need to.
So I am here as a student. These attacks on women, on people of color, on immigrants, on public workers, are drinks that have been tried before and they have been stopped before.
Allow us to stand for the poor child. Allow us to stand for the privileged.
We will stand up again. We will march again. We will preach again. We will organize again. We are black. We are white. We are Latino. We are Native American. We are Democrat. We are Republican. We are independent. We are people of faith. We are people not of faith. We are natives and immigrants. We are business leaders and workers and unemployed. We are doctors and the uninsured. We are gay. We are straight. We are students. We are parents. We are retirees. We are North Carolina. We are America. And we're here. And we ain't going nowhere.
Moral Mondays is not about one man. It is not even about one movement. It is about many movements coming together. But as is so often the case, there is usually an individual who has that combination of experience, education, need, and determination, who rises up, who steps in, and says, there's great history on this. Again and again, individuals who would always tell you they are not the movement, but individuals who came and stepped forward and stepped out front. In North Carolina, one individual did step forward and step out front. He was not a famous figure. He was not known across the country. He was the pastor of a small church in a small town who wanted to do something big, who had been well educated, no question of that, mostly by his mother and his father, and who believed in his heart and his soul that it was necessary to fight back against something that was happening in his state and his nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the pastor, and I've got to make sure I get this right, of the Greenleaf Christian Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina, the president of the North Carolina NAACP, and the man who has become, although he would never claim all the credit, the face of Moral Mondays, Reverend William Barber.
Delighted to be here today with all of you, and we're going to have a little conversation. You know anything about John, we're going to get into some questions, and some questions from you. When they asked me about being on the Nation cruise, I said to them, well, why are they inviting me? Then I remember the story my father used to tell about a man that entered his old mule into the Kentucky Derby. And somebody said, why would you pay all that money to enter a mule into the Kentucky Derby? He probably won't even get out of the gate and they'll be finished the race. He said, I know that, but I thought the exposure would do him some good. So let's thank the nation for believing that the exposure would do us all some good. In North Carolina, we've come together to fight against a dangerous agenda of extremism that often attempts to masquerade itself as moderate or as Republican, but in fact is constitutionally inconsistent, morally indefensible, and economically insane. We find that they actually deride our movement and try to deflect our questions because they can't debate us on the issue. They cannot make their case on moral and constitutional grounds, which is in fact the Achilles heel of extremism. We stand together as equivalent colors of faith and creed. We are united in our full color against our state government's current attack on the most vulnerable. And we stand together to lift up the sacred, most sacred principles of our democracy, of our Constitution, and of our faith. And we are winning and shifting the center of political gravity. We are seeing what Walter Brueggemann calls the genesis and the birthing of subversive hope and imagination. Because before there can be implementation of a social agenda, there must be imagination that believes it is possible and breaks us free of the shackles, sometimes the allegiances, that even we have made with certain levels of oppression. Now, we don't judge justice by polls alone, because if you do that, there was a time when segregation polled high. And if you poll in certain places today, many of the things we fight for would poll above 50%. So you never can root a movement or your message purely in polls, but every now and then something strange happens. And now in our state, after this consistent movement, we have seen that every poll on the issues that we are pushing for, and I'll talk about in a minute, shows that the extremists are out of touch with the most noble values of our faith and our Constitution. In fact, polls now show, after standing up to them and refusing to be depressed and going home, that a mere 17 to 18% of North Carolinians agree with the current direction of our General Assembly. The extremists lie and distort the facts, and they even say our priorities would ruin our state's economy. But we made sure that we had our budget evaluated by a nonpartisan group. And upon that evaluation, they've actually shown that a moral budget rooted in our moral agenda is revenue neutral and would actually add surplus dollars to our state. You should know that the historic Thousands on Jones Street People Coalition is not just 1 year old since 2013, or the Forward Together Moral Movement as it's called. We've been at the Forward Together Moral Monday portion of this movement for 89 straight weeks this week. We've had over 150 actions and more than 160 organizations. But the Forward Together movement that also has what's called the historic Thousands on Jones Street People's Assembly Coalition has been moving ever since 2007. In fact, its genesis was 2006, even when Democrats were in office. In February 2014, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we get some questions, in February 2014, 80 to 100,000 people showed up. 90% of them from North Carolina, 60% white, 40% black, for a people's assembly in the state's capital. The North Carolina NAACP has 150 adult and youth chapters, over 20,000 members. We have 7 new branches in the West led by whites and by Latinos, something we've not seen since the dawning of the NAACP, when the Nation magazine helped get out the call that called the NAACP into existence, when it was primarily whites that formed the NAACP. This past summer, instead of talking about Freedom Summer, we had Moral Freedom Summer and had 50 young college students in 50 counties that were doing voter registration and voter engagement, and they did it in less than 3.5 weeks, had touched 17,000 people. Our moral movement has drawn people from the mountains to the coast, from the borders of Virginia to South Carolina. Over 1,000 of us have made the moral witness of being arrested for raising our voice. Now over 1,000 clergy of all faith have engaged this cause. Labor members and union members have joined with progressive business leaders and civil rights activists. Champions of environmental issues and women's issues and LGBT issues and immigrants' rights issues have come to understand the importance of fighting for these issues, understanding what we call intersectionality. And our movement has inspired similar movements in 9 other states. And we have begun to build moral people's assemblies in at least 30 counties throughout North Carolina. What have we won? We've made our state movement a national issue. Our fusion movement has inspired similar movements in other states. We have addressed race and class together without creating a false bifurcation. We brought in Republican mayors and county commissioners to stand with us in fighting for Medicaid expansion. We helped to save a 60-year-old hospital in eastern North Carolina that was going to close because of the denial of Medicaid expansion. We won a court injunction against extremist plans to use public dollars to fund private schools. We won a challenge to end teacher tenure and do get processed for our school teachers. We won a federal court voter ID lawsuit when the court struck down a legislative immunity motion by the extremists because they wanted to hide their action. And in the Fourth Circuit, we won an injunction against voter suppression that was only nullified by the Supreme Court. We won an injunction against the new legislative building rules, and 960 people who were arrested recently had their cases all thrown out, saying that no legislature or governor can arrest people for protesting in the people's house. And that victory is going to have repercussions around the nation. And we have compiled the first lawsuit after Shelby to challenge voter suppression, and it will go to court in August, John. But it's an interesting case. In our case, the fusion is the NAACP, women, Latino, and students have all joined together to stand against voter suppression. Now, our movement is rooted in the deepest religious values. I see some Moral Monday arrestees out here. I'll recognize some of them later. It's rooted in our deepest religious values. And I say to progressives, don't throw away religion, don't throw away the Bible. There's too much good stuff in there. Amen. Like Isaiah 10 that says, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their right and make women and children their prey. Don't throw that away. Don't let the extremists have that. Or Matthew 25 that says every nation will be judged by how it treats the least of these. But not only have we rooted our framing in our deepest moral principles, we've rooted it in our constitutional principles. Like the first focus of our federal constitution, which is not freedom, but it says the establishment of justice. We want to have a constitutional fight. In our own state constitution that's 146 years old, it has deep moral principles like this one. We hold it to be self-evident that all persons are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the enjoyment of their fruit of their labor, and the pursuit of happiness. Or that passage in the Constitution of North Carolina that says all political power is vested in and derived from the people, and all government of right originates from the people and is founded upon their will only, and it should be instituted solely for the good of the whole. Or that section 6 that says every person in the United States and every person who has been naturalized 18 years of age shall be entitled to vote at any election. Does not say shall be suppressed or shall be allowed to vote if you have a voter ID, but shall be. Or that principle that's in our Constitution, Article 11, Section 4, beneficent provisions for the poor, the unfortunate, and the orphan is the first duty of a civilized and Christian state. That was put in our Constitution 146 years ago when blacks and whites came together to reconstruct the South after the Civil War. And so in our movement, we want to have a moral debate. We say to the extremists, to the so-called ultra-conservative, if you want to have a moral debate, whether it's on faith or whether it's on the Constitution, then bring it on, baby, because we've been dying to have that argument for a long time. Finally, I believe, John, that deep within our being is a longing for a moral compass. For those of us who are moved by the cries of our brothers and sisters, we know, like justice, that acts of caring for the vulnerable, embracing the stranger, healing the sick, protecting workers, welcoming and being fair to all members of the human family, educating all children should never be relegated to the margins of our social consciousness. These are not just policy issues. These are not just issues from some mere left-right debate. These are the centerpieces of our deepest traditions, of our faith, of our values, of our Constitution. And every time we deny living wages and we leave whole communities impoverished, it costs us on the backside of life. Every time we fail to provide health care on the front side of life, it costs us on the backside of life. Every time we deny people equal protection under the law, that phrase that was put in the 14th Amendment, people say, well, how can you, as an African American, we had this conversation one day, how can you be for LGBT rights? I said, because I come from a people that know what it's like when discrimination is codified within the Constitution. And so equal protection under the law must be a value that we not only live for, but we're willing to be arrested for, and if necessary to die for, because without it, people die every day. The greatest myth of our time is the notion that extreme policies harm only a small subset of people, such as people of color, such as gay people, such as women, when in fact extreme policies harm us all. And what we have witnessed in North Carolina and other parts of the nation now are wealthy extremists. I heard Sister Pollard talk about this. Wealthy extremists who play on the fears of working class white people. They run on things in the South like abortion, prayer to school, and homosexuality. That's what they run on to get the votes. But when they get the power, the primary thing they do is legislate on behalf of the wealthy. And what our job is to unpack the truth about these extreme policies, not just Democrat, Republican, left versus right, but to show people how they're immoral, how they're constitutionally inconsistent, with the hope that we can win some of the extremists, that they can come back to their humanity, but also with the hope that if they do not come back, we can help people begin to imagine again, like Langston Hughes, and say, America will be America one day. And how do we do that? We believe there are 5 areas that we have to merge together. 1, pro-labor, anti-poverty policies that create economic sustainability by fighting for employment, living wages, the alleviation of disparate unemployment, a green economy, labor rights, affordable housing, targeted empowerment zones, strong safety nets for the poor, fair policies for immigrants, infrastructure development, and fair tax reform. Number 2, educational equality by ensuring that every child receives a high-quality, well-funded, constitutional, diverse public education, as well as access to community colleges and universities and by securing equitable funding for minority colleges and universities. Number 3, health care for all by assuring access to the Affordable Care Act, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, protection of women's health, and providing environmental protection. Number 4, fairness in the criminal justice system by addressing the continuing inequalities in the system that impact black, brown, and poor white people. And number 5, protecting and expanding voting rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, immigrants' rights, and the fundamental principle of equal protection under the law. We believe that the great framework of our faith and the great frameworks of our Constitution allow us to embrace intersectionally all of these issues. And we teach people that if you're an environmentalist, you got to be concerned about public education, because the same people fighting environmentalists are the same people fighting the advocates of public education. If you're concerned about LGBT rights, you have to be concerned about voting rights, because most often the same people that are against voting rights are also against LGBT rights. And once we understand the intersectionality, what we will understand is we are not being fought because of our weakness. We are being fought because of our strength. And if they are cynical enough to be together, we ought to be smart enough to come together. That's what the moral movement says. Now, how do you do it in that proof? We found 12 little steps that help us out. Number 1, in order to build this movement, and it must be, we believe that we have to have state-based movements. State-based. You're concerned about the Congress, if you're concerned about the presidency, you're concerned about changing America, you must think states. Indigenously led, deeply moral, deeply constitutional, anti-racist, anti-poverty, pro-justice, pro-labor, fusion transformative coalition. And we believe that they can follow these steps. Number one, you have to engage indigenously led, homegrown leadership. Nobody's going to helicopter in and do this for us. And we have to have that kind of movement that lifts up from the bottom. Change didn't happen from DC down, it happened from Montgomery up. Number two, we must use moral language to frame and critique public policy based on our deepest moral and constitutional values, regardless of who is in power. When we started this movement, Democrats were in power. We had to fight Democrats to get same-day registration and early voting. We had to fight Democrats to get a minimum wage raised in North Carolina. We had to fight Democrats. And if you have a moral movement, you must fight both parties, otherwise it undermines your moral call because it suggests that you're in it for partisan reasons, not for the deeper moral reasons. Number three, you have to demonstrate a commitment to civil disobedience that follows the steps of the movement and is designed to change the public conversation. Number four, you have to build a stage from which to lift the voices of everyday people affected by the immoral extremist policies and not a stage for partisan politics. No politician can stand on the Moral Monday stage. You can be among the people, but I'll talk a little bit about what a Moral Monday stage looks like. Number five, you must build a coalition of moral and religious leaders of all faith. Number six, you must intentionally diversify the movement with the goal of winning unlikely allies and ensure that youth are at the center. Number seven, you must build transformative long-term coalition relationships rooted in a clear agenda that doesn't measure success just by electoral outcomes and that destroys the myths of extremism. Number eight, you must make a serious commitment to academic and empirical analysis. I tell people all the time, because some folks get it twisted, they say, well, he's just a preacher. Hell no, I'm not just a preacher, I'm a scholar. I don't brag about that, but it's Reverend Dr. William Barber. My doctorate is in pastoral care and public policy because my father taught me a long time ago, the worst thing you can do is be loud and wrong. And not only am I a scholar, but we have a whole team of Moral Monday scholars, economists, health professionals, that all surround us and help us make this case. My son's an environmental physicist, and he's helping to lead young people because you have to have a deep commitment to academic and empirical analysis of policy. Number nine, you use social media and cultural arts in all of its forms to push the message. Number 10, you must engage in voter registration and education. And number 11, you must pursue a strong legal strategy. You must have lawyers that are willing to pick the Constitution up, dust it off, and get the issues you raise in the streets into the courts and have them challenged in the courts. And then number 12, you must resist a one-moment mentality. And nobody's concerned about you just having one rally. As I said, Moral Monday, we've been at this 89 weeks. If you add all the years before that, it's been 8 years. Long before the nation even knew anything about us. Long before any of you. It didn't just happen like that. Because it's hard work. This, in essence, if I were to say, what is this moral movement about? My son told me, as a scientist, he said, Daddy, if you ever get out in the lost, out in the mountains, terrain, I want you to be careful. I said, well, why would I be lost in the mountains? He said, Daddy, just in case. He said, if you ever get lost out there and you try to hike your way out, he said, before you come out, don't come out through the valley, through the lowland, because snakes live down there. He said, it might be hard, but change your position and climb up the mountain. Because if you climb up the mountain high enough, you'll get to a point that's above the snake line. Because snakes can't live at high altitude. They asphyxiate, something about them being cold-blooded. He said, so Daddy, climb up the mountain. You know, I made a sermon out there. I said, that's what America's got to do. That's what North Carolina's got to do. If we're going to win this battle against extremism, we got to change the location of debate. You can't win a debate with the snakes. You can't win a debate down there in the lowlands. And just a left-right argument, that's in the lowlands. They designed that. We're calling people right that we say are wrong. That's too low. We need a higher argument. We need to take this argument higher. We need to raise ourselves and this consciousness of this nation above the state line. And there's some places above the state. It's mighty low to steal people's life because you won't give them Medicaid expansion. It's mighty low to keep children and to deny LGBT individuals their right, their constitutional right. That's mighty low. But if we can get above the state line, let me see, above the state, oh, here's a place above the state line. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice above all. That's above the state line. Justice for all. That's above the state line. Ensuring health care and women's health care and environmental justice. That's above the state line. And we believe in the moral, forward together moral movement. If we can raise the conversation above the state line, snakes will asphyxiate and we will win the journey to a better and a better and a better and a brighter America. But we've got to get this argument above the snake line.